I had always dreamed of camping in the vast wilderness of Blue Ridge National Park. With its endless trails, dense forests, and remote spots, it seemed like the perfect escape from daily life. So, when the opportunity finally came, I packed my gear, left my phone locked in the car, and set off into the wild. The first day was peaceful. Just me, the whispering trees, and the distant calls of birds. I hiked about 7 miles into the backcountry and set up camp near a small stream. There wasn't another soul in sight. Exactly what I had hoped for. Complete solitude. By nightfall, I had a small fire crackling and was settling into the stillness. The sounds of nature surrounded me. Crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant murmur of flowing water. But as I gazed into the flames, an unsettling sensation crept over me. That eerie feeling of being watched. I shook it off. I was alone. That was the whole point of coming here. Sometime past midnight, I woke up. Not because of a sound, but because of the absence of one. The wind had stopped. The gentle trickle of the creek beside my tent had vanished. Even the usual chirping of insects had ceased. The entire forest felt wrong. Then I heard footsteps. Not the scurrying of an animal, but slow, deliberate steps. Human steps. I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps halted just outside my tent. I could hear the faint crunch of leaves as someone, or something, shifted their weight. My knife was in my backpack, just out of reach. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in place. Then, something brushed against the fabric of my tent. I nearly gasped but managed to clamp my mouth shut. A slow, dragging sound followed, like a hand, or maybe a stick, tracing along the material. Whatever it was circling me. My breaths came in short, panicked bursts. I wanted to unzip the tent and run, but fear pinned me down. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. No retreating footsteps, no rustling in the underbrush, just silence. I lay motionless, listening for what felt like forever. When daylight finally broke, I cautiously unzipped my tent and stepped outside. Everything looked normal. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the forest was just playing tricks on me. But then I saw them. Footprints. Large, deep impressions in the dirt, circling my tent. They weren't mine. Someone had been out there, watching me. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had in my life. My first thought was to hike straight back to my car, but something made me hesitate. I was deep in the mountains, hours from safety. If someone had been lurking near my camp, what if they were waiting for me to leave? Instead, I decided to take a longer, less direct route back, hoping to lose anyone who might be tracking me. By midday, I started to feel more at ease. The forest felt normal again. Just trees, birds, and the occasional rustling of small animals. I told myself I had overreacted, that my imagination had gotten the better of me. But then, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A thin piece of string stretched between two trees at ankle height. A tripwire. I froze. My mind raced. This wasn't something natural. Someone had put it there. But why? Was it a trap? A warning? My skin crawled as I scanned the trees around me. That's when I noticed it. Another footprint, partially concealed beneath a layer of leaves. Someone had been here recently. Someone who didn't want to be found. Then a twig snapped. My pulse thundered in my ears as I spun around. Just trees. Just shadows. But I knew I wasn't alone. A rustling sound came from behind me. I turned back, and my stomach twisted into knots. Hanging from a low branch, gently swaying, was a crude little doll made of twigs, bound together with string. It hadn't been there moments ago. Panic hit me like a wave. I didn't think I ran, harder than I ever had before. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't dare slow down. I didn't stop until I stumbled onto the main trail, where, finally, I saw another person, a middle-aged hiker with a large backpack. He looked startled as I rushed toward him, out of breath. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, trying to steady myself. "Yeah, just trying to get back before dark." He gave me a knowing look. "Yeah, these woods get real empty at night. Best not to be out here alone." I didn't tell him what had happened. I just hiked the rest of the way in silence, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, hands trembling. I had planned to spend 3 nights out there. I barely lasted one. I don't know who or what was in those woods. I don't know what they wanted. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just barely escaped something. I was deep in the wilderness of northern Oregon, spending several days trekking through the backcountry. By this point, I was about 22 miles from the nearest road, and for the first 2 days, I hadn't come across a single person. It was early autumn, so the air was crisp and chilly, probably too cold for most people to be comfortable, but I had all the gear I needed. That morning, I woke up, brewed a quick cup of coffee over my small camp stove, then packed up and set out toward the next campsite. It was 6 miles away, which was a pretty long hike in the mountains. About 4 hours into my trek, I suddenly heard footsteps coming from up ahead. Looking up, I saw a man walking toward me from the opposite direction. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here, but I nodded and gave a small smile as he passed. That's when I noticed something strange. He wasn't carrying anything. No backpack, no water, not even a jacket. He was just dressed in a long-sleeve shirt and a pair of worn hiking pants. The sight unsettled me enough that I turned to get another look at him. At that exact moment, he also turned back to glance at me. Not wanting to make things awkward, I quickly faced forward again and kept walking. After covering some more distance, I pushed the strange encounter from my mind. I reasoned that he might have had a campsite nearby and had just gone for a short walk. But I also knew there weren't any established sites in that area. Still, it didn't seem worth dwelling on. The next few hours were tough, but I eventually reached my campsite. It was empty, just a small clearing with barely enough space for my tent. I had expected a much better view, but instead, the site was boxed in by dense trees, making it feel more like the middle of a forest than the top of a mountain. Exhausted, I immediately set up my tent, then sat down to relax and watch the sunset. As I sat there, I suddenly heard a faint shuffling sound behind me. Turning around, I was completely stunned. It was the same man I had passed earlier. He still had no backpack, no supplies, nothing. But what confused me even more was why he was here. He had been heading in the opposite direction when I last saw him, which meant he must have turned around shortly after passing me. He approached the edge of my campsite but didn't acknowledge me at all. It was as if he was pretending I wasn't there or couldn't see me. Without a word, he walked to the far side of the small clearing and sat down on the dirt, staring into the forest. No tent, no sleeping bag, just sitting there. He was only about 15 feet away, so I got a better look at him this time. He seemed to be in his late 30s, with short brown hair and a scruffy beard. Something about him put me on edge. Nothing about this was normal, and as the sun dipped lower, the feeling of unease only grew. Who was this guy, and why was he 22 miles into the wilderness without any food, water, or shelter? 30 minutes passed, and he still hadn't moved. I decided I couldn't stay there. I didn't have anywhere else to go, but I figured it was safer to find another random spot to camp rather than stay near him. I started packing up my gear, and that's when he finally reacted. As soon as I began taking down my tent, he turned his head toward me. And once he started watching, he didn't stop. Every time I glanced at him, he was staring right at me. When I had everything packed away, I saw him stand up in my peripheral vision. Without hesitation, I started walking fast. I could hear his footsteps behind me, following closely. My hand clenched around the small knife I carried, unsure of what he was planning. After about a minute, I checked over my shoulder. He was still following but falling behind. That's when I took a chance. I veered off the trail and into the trees. By now, the forest was pitch black, and I hoped he hadn't seen me leave the path. I crouched behind a tree, holding my breath. About 30 seconds later, I heard his footsteps reach the spot where I had left the trail. He stopped. I could barely make out his silhouette in the dark as he stood there, scanning the trees like he knew I was close. Then he started shouting. His voice was disturbingly friendly, like he was trying to lure me out. After 2 minutes, he stopped calling out. But instead of returning to the campsite, he did something far worse. He stepped off the trail and into the woods on the other side. I watched in horror as his shape disappeared into the dense trees. Then, everything went silent. I stayed hidden for over an hour before I finally built up the nerve to move. I forced myself to push forward and skipped the next campsite entirely, hiking all night to get as far away as possible. Once I made it back to town, I filed a report with the local authorities. They never followed up. I still don't know if that man was living out there, planning to rob someone, or had even worse intentions. But I do know one thing: I was lucky to get away. Spending a weekend camping in Grayson National Park had always been a dream of mine. The vast wilderness, towering rock formations, and the peaceful solitude of nature had an undeniable pull. So when my best friend Jake and I finally had the opportunity to take a trip, we gathered our gear, packed the car, and set off for the park. After hours of driving, we arrived at a remote campsite far from the usual crowd. The seclusion was exactly what we had hoped for. Just us, the dense woods, and the open sky. We set up our tent in a small clearing, built a fire, and spent the evening sharing stories beneath a sky filled with stars. As darkness deepened, the air grew cooler, and the only sounds were the occasional hoots of an owl and the rustling of the trees. It was exactly the peaceful escape I had envisioned, but that tranquility wouldn't last. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by an eerie silence, followed by a crunching sound outside. Holding my breath, I listened closely. Another crunch. Someone, or something, was moving near our tent. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as I turned toward Jake, but he was still fast asleep. I remained as still as possible, convincing myself it was just a passing animal. But then the zipper of our tent began to move. I shot up, grabbing the flashlight beside me and pointing it at the entrance. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. The zipper stopped. Silence returned. Jake stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" he muttered. "Someone's outside," I whispered. We both sat frozen, listening. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of footsteps slowly faded away. I unzipped the tent and shined the flashlight into the darkness. Whoever or whatever had been there was gone. The next morning, we discovered footprints circling our tent. They were human, but something felt off. The impressions were deep, unnaturally heavy, and they only led toward our tent. No return tracks. Unsettled, we decided to move deeper into the woods, convincing ourselves it must have been a lost hiker. But an uneasy feeling lingered in the back of our minds. That night, we built a larger fire, hoping the extra light would keep any unwanted visitors away. As the hours passed, the forest remained eerily quiet until the sounds started again. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. This time, Jake was just as tense as I was. "If it's just an animal, why does it feel like it's watching us?" he muttered. I had no answer, but I felt it too. By 2 a.m., exhaustion overtook us, and we reluctantly crawled into the tent. I lay awake, listening, waiting. Just as I began to drift off, a whisper cut through the silence. "Are you awake?" My stomach dropped. The voice wasn't Jake's. I sat up abruptly, fumbling for the flashlight, and shined it toward Jake. He was still asleep. The whisper hadn't come from inside the tent. It had come from outside. My hands shook as I grabbed Jake and shook him awake. "We need to go. Now." He didn't question me. We scrambled out of the tent, stuffing our gear into our packs with trembling hands. As we turned toward the trail leading back to our car, I caught sight of something beyond the tree line. A figure standing in the shadows. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. Then another figure appeared. Then a third. Jake saw them too. "Run!" We took off, sprinting through the dark, tripping over roots and rocks. Behind us, heavy footsteps pounded the earth, faster than before. Something or someone was chasing us. I dared a glance back. One of the figures had broken into a full sprint, closing the gap between us. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest, but we didn't stop. We reached the car, gasping for air. Yanking the doors open, we threw our bags inside and scrambled in, locking the doors behind us. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the trail. Empty. No figures. No movement. Just the silent, dark forest. We didn't wait around. We sped away, not stopping until we reached a brightly lit gas station miles down the road. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there with us. Maybe it was an unhinged wanderer. Maybe someone had been living deep in the woods, waiting for the right moment to approach. But one thing was certain. They weren't lost. They were waiting. This happened a little over 2 years ago. My name is Ryan, and before this, I had absolutely no experience with camping. I had always wanted to try it, though, and figured the only way to learn was to just go for it. So, this was my first time out in the wilderness. I picked a campground about 2 hours from where I lived. It seemed like the right balance, not too busy but also not completely isolated, which felt like a good choice for a beginner. I drove up there, reached the starting point around midday, and then hiked for a couple more hours before arriving at the site. The camping area had a few wooden picnic tables and a couple of built-in barbecue grills. Several narrow trails branched off from the main area, leading to smaller, more private spots where other campers had already set up their tents. I followed one of these paths, picked a spot, and spent the next hour getting my tent pitched properly, making sure I had everything in order. By then, some of the other campers were in the main area, chatting and using the grills. I'm not the most outgoing person, so I didn't feel comfortable just walking up and joining the conversation. About half an hour later, though, a guy came over to where I was staying and invited me to come hang out with them. He seemed friendly enough, so I figured why not. I followed him back and met some of the others who were camping there. They all seemed cool, so I stuck around for a while. After about an hour, people started heading back to their tents. I said goodnight and did the same. It was around 7 p.m., meaning there was about an hour of daylight left when the guy who had invited me earlier, his name was Kyle, came back over to my tent. He was close to my age, somewhere in his mid to late 20s. Kyle asked if I had ever been to this area before. I told him no. Then he asked if I knew about a lake nearby. Again, I said no, and he immediately started talking about this hidden lake that hardly anyone knew about, describing it as an incredible spot. He said he was heading there and asked if I wanted to come along. It felt like a nice offer, and to be honest, I was really curious. I tossed my things back into my tent and followed him. He said it was only about a 10-minute walk through the woods, so we'd have plenty of time before the sun went down. We followed a very narrow footpath into the trees. It wasn't an official trail, but it looked like it had been used before. However, 10 minutes passed, and I didn't see any sign of a lake. What was even weirder was that Kyle, who had been really chatty before, suddenly got quiet. Instead of keeping up the conversation, he started giving short, one-word answers. He also kept glancing toward the sunset. At first, I thought maybe he was just making sure we had enough daylight left, but something in my gut told me otherwise, like he was actually waiting for it to get dark. After 20 minutes of walking, I started to slow down and put some distance between us. Something felt off. My heart was pounding, and I could feel adrenaline kicking in, even though I wasn't sure why. The trees were casting long, thin shadows now, and it was eerily quiet. Then, when I thought I had a chance, I turned and tried to slip away as quietly as possible. The moment I moved, though, he noticed. At first, he called out to me in a friendly tone, like he was still playing the part of my buddy. But when I didn't stop, his voice quickly turned to frustration. I heard him start running after me. For what felt like a full minute, I could hear him chasing me, yelling angrily. Then, his footsteps started to slow down, and I heard a sharp metallic sound behind me. I risked a quick glance back and saw something, what looked like a knife, bouncing off a tree just a few feet away. It must have been his last-ditch effort to stop me. After that, I didn't hear him anymore. I kept running until I made it back to the campsite. Out of breath, I tried to explain what had happened, and one of the other campers called the police. Kyle, or whoever he really was, never came back. In fact, everyone else said they had seen him at the campsite earlier, but after looking around, there was no sign that he even had a tent. It seemed like he had singled me out because I was alone and didn't have much experience with camping. Thankfully, I never found out what he had planned that night, because if I had, I doubt I'd be here to tell the story. Last year, I spent a couple of weeks traveling through Wyoming. I had a small camper set up in the bed of my truck, so I usually stayed at campgrounds or parked wherever public land allowed. This was one of my final nights before heading back the way I came. Unfortunately, I ran into some issues with my truck that day, and fixing them took up most of my time. By the time the sun was dipping below the horizon, I had barely made any progress on my drive. I stopped at a gas station to grab a coffee and decided to push on for another couple of hours before finding a place to stay the night. As I continued driving, the highway grew emptier until it seemed like I had the whole road to myself. Using an app, I searched for the nearest place to camp and found a spot just off the main road on public land. When I reached the turnoff, I saw it was a narrow dirt trail leading about a quarter mile into the forest. At the end was a small grassy clearing encircled by trees, with no other campers in sight. I pulled in, parked facing the exit, and climbed into the camper to settle in. It was probably around 11 or midnight, and I was ready to sleep. But just as I lay down, a beam of light seeped through the edges of the privacy screen on my window. I sat up and lifted a corner just enough to peek outside. Headlights were approaching down the path. As they reached the clearing, the vehicle slowed to a halt. It seemed like whoever was inside had noticed me and maybe decided against camping in the same place. But instead of turning around, they just sat there at the entrance. I could make out that it was a truck, an older model with rust covering the front bumper. The headlights were too bright for me to see anything else clearly. Something about it didn't feel right. Maybe it was just instinct, but after a few minutes of them idling there, I knew I wouldn't be getting any sleep. I started folding up my bed, getting ready to leave. Before I could climb out of the camper and into my truck, I heard a door creak open. Peeking out again, I saw they had switched off their headlights, and two men were now standing outside in the darkness. They started walking toward my camper, and I could barely make out something in their hands. I let the privacy screen fall back into place and listened as their footsteps crept closer, deliberately quiet. They circled my truck, but then, suddenly, they both stopped. It was like they somehow sensed I was awake. "Hey, can you help us? We just need some directions." One of them called out. "Can you open up?" Their voices had a slurred, uneven tone. Maybe they were drunk, maybe worse. Either way, I had no idea what they were capable of. I risked another glance out the window and saw one of them standing right against my truck, gripping something heavy, maybe a crowbar or a sledgehammer. That erased any doubt about their intentions. I still had no way to leave without stepping out of my camper to get into my truck. One of them ran a hard object along the camper door, pressing against it, obviously trying to force it open. I braced my legs against it, holding it shut. Then, out of nowhere, a gunshot rang out. It didn't come from the two men. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods. For a brief second, they froze. Then, in a flash, they bolted back to their truck. Within moments, they had sped off down the trail, disappearing into the night. I still have no clue who fired that shot, but I knew this was my best chance to escape. I scrambled from the camper into the driver's seat, started the truck, and quickly scanned the woods. I didn't see anyone. Without wasting another second, I sped back down the dirt road and onto the highway, only stopping an hour later at a well-lit truck stop. What really happened that night is still a mystery. The only thing that makes sense is that a hunter or another camper was nearby, saw what was unfolding, and fired a warning shot to scare them off. But considering how isolated I was, it seems too unlikely to be a coincidence. If that shot hadn't been fired, my truck and camper might be listed on some sketchy online marketplace right now, and I might have never been heard from again. I never planned on camping alone in Blackwood National Forest. My buddy Mike was supposed to join me, but he backed out at the last second, leaving me with two choices: Cancel or go solo. My stubborn side won. I had the gear, the experience, and a rare free weekend. I wasn't about to waste it. I picked a secluded spot deep in the woods, far from the usual trails and crowded campgrounds. It was perfect. Quiet except for the occasional bird calls and the wind shifting through the trees. After setting up my tent near a narrow creek, I built a fire and cooked dinner, feeling completely at ease. By nightfall, the forest was swallowed in darkness. The fire crackled, throwing shifting shadows against the tree trunks. I sat there, taking in the wilderness, letting the solitude settle around me. But as the flames died lower, something felt wrong. The usual nighttime sounds, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, distant hoots, had all vanished. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a wet, choking noise, like something struggling for air. My body stiffened. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees, but the dense undergrowth revealed nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, but deep in my gut, I knew better. The sound wasn't natural. It was human but twisted. Then came another noise, a dragging sound, something heavy being pulled through the brush. Slow, labored. I stood up, gripping my flashlight tighter. "Hello," I called, my voice unsteady. Silence. I swept my beam across the trees, my heart hammering. And then, just at the edge of the light's reach, something moved. A shape, hunched over, its limbs too long, its posture unnatural. It shuddered as it pulled itself forward, that awful, gurgling rasp echoing through the trees. I froze. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure twitched. Its head snapped toward me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt it stare. Then it made a sound, a broken, wet gasp, like it was trying to speak through waterlogged lungs. A sharp crack of snapping branches sounded behind me. I whirled, my flashlight trembling in my grip. Something else was there. I could hear heavy breathing, a slow, shuffling step. A shadow moved between the trees, too fast, impossibly fast. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my pack, not even bothering to put out the fire. As I took a step back, twigs snapped in every direction, surrounding me. Then, just beside my ear, a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I bolted. I ran blindly through the dark, tripping over roots and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But I didn't stop. That awful gurgling sound followed, close, too close, weaving through the trees like it was right behind me. Something grabbed my backpack. I screamed, twisting free, my pulse hammering as I stumbled forward. I didn't dare look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until I saw the glint of my car's headlights reflecting off the metal. I reached it, fumbling for my keys, my shaking hands barely managing to shove them into the lock. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut. One last glance at the tree line. The figure stood at the edge of the forest, head tilted, watching. Then 2 more figures stepped out behind it. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. Gravel kicked up behind me as I tore down the dirt road, not stopping until I was miles away. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if it was human, but I do know one thing. It wasn't alone, and neither was I.